Good evening. Can you hear me okay? I might just have a big mouth. My name is Ricky Jones. I'm the outgoing chair of the Department of Pan-African Studies here at the University of Louisville. That's celebrating its 50th anniversary. So it's one of the oldest Black Studies departments in the country. So let's give it up for Pan-African Studies. The actual celebration will be the 23-24 school year, and by that time, the new chair of the department will be Dr. Brandon McCormick, who's with us in the back here. A U of L grad, Vanderbilt PhD, and I think he will be absolutely incredible. Thank you all for coming out on this rainy night as we do what the people in DC say they do. For many years, we have reached across the aisle, as it were, to one another, my dear brother Gary Gregg and myself, to do events together where we talk to students for the most part, but talk to them about politics, race, society, all the nuances that you should experience when you come to get an education at an institution of higher learning. At least for us, I'm not speaking for anybody else, but for Dr. Gregg and I, we're not just concerned about what type of jobs you get when you leave the University of Louisville, but we're concerned about what types of citizens you are, right? What are you going to contribute to the world? So we think that's very, very important. So we're in Black History Month. It's very interesting. We're in Black History Month in a country that doesn't want you to learn about Black history, which is a very odd scenario. All the noise right now that you hear that's going on around the African American AP class, it is just that, noise. One, even if that class were perfect, right? Who's going to teach the class in this country? I know in public schools around the country, schools really do not have the intellectual horsepower among their faculty who are well-schooled in any information about Black people throughout the diaspora to effectively teach that information to our students. Why don't they have it? Because they came through American public schools and private schools and independent schools and Catholic schools where we have seen Black people culled out of curricula for a very long time. If you learn anything about Black people, it starts in 1619, like we were just dropped on the world stage as slaves. So what went on with Black people before 1619, before we came to this country? What do you really know about Martin Luther King Jr. except I Have a Dream? Who's actually read that entire speech? Have you ever heard of Gabriel Prosser? Have you ever heard of Denmark Vesey? Do you know anything about these people? And in fact, in many states around the country right now, to put it bluntly, to learn that information about the second sin of America, because the original sin of America was what this country did to Native Americans. But the second sin is the enslavement of African people. And to learn about the consequences of that second sin is literally illegal in many states in this country right now. And people don't want to talk about that in very plain terms. We have a man tonight who has joined people like myself, as I tell my students now, in the state of Kentucky, if you teach the truth about race, the truth about Black people in this country, you are literally a criminal. And so when you come to learn about it, you are joining me and others in a criminal enterprise. And we like to welcome tonight another criminal, the good Reverend Dr. Kevin Cosby. I want to share with you before he's formally introduced a quote from a guy named Carter G. Woodson. Many of you have never heard of Carter G. Woodson. You probably should have heard of Carter G. Woodson, seeing that it is Black History Month. He was the founder of Black History Week that eventually became Black History Month. But very few people have actually read the seminal work of Carter G. Woodson called The Miseducation of the Negro from 1933. These are Carter G. Woodson's words, not mine, about the effect of anti-Black racism on African Americans. Woodson, if you can control a man's thinking through education, that is, you do not have to worry about his actions. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it himself. If you make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door, He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. That's Carter G. Woodson. So why are people so upset about teaching black people and white people and others the truth about race in America? Because they know if they learn that truth, they will no longer demand that back door. Tonight, we have a criminal with us. The president of Simmons College, as well as the minister, the pastor of St. Stephen Church, who is actually my pastor, Reverend Kevin Cosby, and he will be introduced to you formally, but I want to say this. I love this man. Some things about how good a person are. I remember my grandmother died some years ago. This man called me while I was in Atlanta every day for weeks just to pray with me because I was a mess. And no matter what disagreements we've had on tactics, we both have that overall love of black people and black progress. And I'm very interested to hear what a black man without fear will say here tonight on the University of Louisville's campus for Black History Month. So with that, we bring one of our fabulous students for this formal introduction of Reverend Dr. Kevin Cosby.
Hello, thank you all for coming out tonight and for joining us on YouTube. My name is Cameron McPherson. I'm a McConnell Scholar here at the University of Louisville. And tonight we continue our year-long of exploring variety left and right, where we are seeking understanding of a variety of political, social, and economic thought in America today. This month, we are particularly focusing on Black political thought and related issues. We are pleased to be able to partner with U of L's own Dr. Ricky Jones, Chair of Pan-African Studies, in our work this month. Dr. Jones himself will be our guest discussing recent controversies that have erupted over teaching Black history on February 21st. We will hope you will join us on YouTube that evening. We also urge you to catch up on this year's programming on the McConnell Center's YouTube page and our soon-to-be relaunched the McConnell Center podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Tonight, we have the distinct honor of hosting President Kevin Cosby. For more than 40 years, Dr. Cosby has served as the senior pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church, the largest African-American church in the state of Kentucky, as well as the largest private employer of African-Americans in the state. In 2005, Dr. Cosby was inaugurated as the 13th president of Simmons College in Kentucky. In 2007, he led the once fledgling college to reclaim its original campus that was lost during the Great Depression, and has since expanded the college's campus to 3 locations, as well as its reputation to nationwide. He has been an important leader in our community for decades and is recognized across the nation for his steady leadership and insightful ideas. Dr. Cosby released a new book in the spring of 2021 entitled Getting to the Promised Land, Black America and the Unfinished Work of the Civil Rights Movement. This book is a biblical commentary on the American descendants of slavery and is published by Westminster John Knox Press. President Cosby, it is our pleasure to welcome you back to McConnell Center.
Thank you so much, my sister, for those kind words of introduction to my co-conspirator, Dr. Ricky Jones, my good brother and friend. I love you, brother. And to all of you, it's an honor to be with you today. During Black History Month, which is a misnomer if you are conscious, because it should not be Black History Month. Originally it was Black History Week, but it should be Black History Year, because every year and every day of your life, you should be centered in your own truth and centered in your own experience. But the wonderful thing about Black History, quote unquote, month, is it does give Black scholars the opportunity to talk about America's history without the negative repercussions that often come when we tell the truth about America, its present, its past, CRT, we love to talk about. Everyone's opposed to CRT, which to me stands for, in many instances, Caucasians rejecting truth. As a minister, I heard Jesus say that the truth shall make you free, and it will make you free, but it will also make you uncomfortable in the process of learning about it. And Dr. Jones said that, and he's right, technically speaking, the Native Americans, the atrocities committed against them, the Trail of Tears and other atrocities committed against the indigenous population was America's original sin. And then the kidnapping and the forced migration of Africans into this country was America's second sin. So you can think of those two L words. This is what made America America. L word number one is free land. L word number two, free labor. Free land, or stolen land from the indigenous population, and free labor from Africans. But if you were to ask me what America's original sin was, America's original sin was greed. And what was done to the indigenous population, what was done to my ancestors, was simply a consequence of greed, of theft. I was asked to talk about, and I was given my topic, so I'll try to be true to the topic I was given. I was asked to talk about empathy. And Dr. Jones, in an indirect way, alluded to it. Empathy. The opposite of empathy is apathy. And the whole pushback against learning America's history is to block, avoid, prevent what we all need, and that's empathy. And empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's situation and to view life through their lenses, to get into their skin and to see how life looks from their perspective. And I will submit to you that the greatest sign of a truly spiritual person is when that person has really grasped and inculcated into their very being this important impulse of empathy. Or as the native population would say, do not judge another person until you have walked a mile in their moccasins. And then when you walk a mile in their moccasins, you say, you know what, I see things differently. I will read a poem to you by Country Collin. And Country Collin was a brilliant poet. And during the Renaissance, the Black Renaissance of the early part of the 20th century. And this was what he said. He says, once riding in old Baltimore, heart filled, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean. Now, I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December of all the things that happened there. That's all that I remember. Why did Country Collin poem this? Why did he write these verses? He wrote these verses because some young white kid who was 8 called a black kid who was a nigger. And he called him that because he had no empathy for the black kid. He was unable to put himself into the circumstances of that kid and feel what that kid was feeling. What does it mean to be a black person in a white-controlled world? I remember when I was a kid, you very seldom saw blacks on television. Now, this is a long time ago, back when Abraham Lincoln was a precinct captain here. But one very seldom saw blacks on television. This was back in the 60s. And this may sound strange, but whenever there was a black on television, my sisters and I, we saw someone on television that was black, we would run to our mother and say, Mom, come quick. A black person is on television. And she'd stop what she was doing to see black people on television, because everybody on television is white. It's an all-white world. This is what white privilege is. This is a good example. No one during that era who was white ever had to go to their mom and say, Mom, come quick, a white person's on television. You just take it for granted. It's the default of America. Whiteness is the default. Until something disrupts the default, and you say, now I see things differently through someone else's eyes. Patricia Hill Collins, who's one of my favorite womanist scholars, she wrote the book on black feminism, Patricia Hill Collins. And she is what's called a standpoint theorist. And standpoint theory of womenist scholarship is basically this, that a person's position in life influences how they see things. How you see things is based on where you are in life. And the overarching goal, which is nothing but propaganda, of scholarship, of the American narrative, has been to force everyone to see reality through a white lens. This was called modernity. Everything is centered around the European gaze, the European lens. And that's why we study history. You may ask, why do I need to study history? You know, I can't go to a restaurant and say, well, I know some historical facts, and they would pay for my meal. You will not be able to get a cup of coffee from Starbucks just because you are historically literate. So therefore, what is the utility and value of history? Well, you study history for 3 reasons. And it's powerful, and that's why there's pushback against it. Number 1, you study history to learn its lessons. There are some lessons that we need to learn in the United States from our historical experience. To learn this lesson. How did we get here? How do you explain the fact that white America is 60% of the population, yet they control over 90% of the wealth? And blacks are 13% of the population, and we control less than 3% of the wealth. How do you explain this wealth chasm that exists in the United States between blacks and whites? Well, I internalize that as a black person. Well, it must be because when God made me, God was guilty of creative malfeasance. When there are some historical realities, you cannot work me for 246 years without a paycheck. 246 years, from 1619 to 1865 without a paycheck. And it was our enslavement that created the wealth of the United States. In 1790, the United States was at the bottom of all Western nations. In 1790, at the bottom economically. By 1860, at the eve of the Civil War, America was second only behind England. And what drove the economy, the wealth of the country, was free labor, especially as cotton became king. Cotton, especially in the 1940s and 50s, cotton was to the United States what oil is to Saudi Arabia. The Industrial Revolution came into existence through the textile mills because black folk picked the cotton. So the little bees make the honeycomb and the big bees make the honey. Colored folk pick the cotton and the white folk get the money. 246 years without a paycheck. So Michael Earl Dyson says that if you have one slave, you're rich. You have 10 slaves, you are wealthy. But if you have 4 million slaves, you're the United States of America. And that's how we became wealthy. 246 years of slavery. And then Abraham Lincoln, who did not free the slaves, he fired the slaves. And you have after that another 100 plus years of semi-slavery called Jim Crow. And then after that, you have another 50 years of what Patrick Moynihan called benign neglect. And now you have today present-day indifference, which explains why there is a tremendous wealth chasm in the United States, because you study history to learn its lessons. And we have never repaired it. We have reformed, quote unquote reformed, but there's a difference between reform and repair. If you steal my car on Monday, and you get saved, hallelujah, on Tuesday, and you still driving my car on Wednesday, you were not saved on Tuesday. No, if I was at St. Stephen, they would be shouting, right? Let me tell you, let me give you some good soteriology. If you steal my car on Monday, get saved on Tuesday, let me tell you what you're going to do on Wednesday. If you say, I'm going to bring your car back wrong, you're going to bring my car back washed, full of gas, oil change, tune-up, and everything else. What I'm saying to black folk that white folk don't want to hear and white folk need to hear for purposes of empathy is white folk got my car. White America has my car, and they don't want to hear that. So you study history to learn, as Walter Brueggemann says, that justice, which is the Hebrew word sadiqwa, there's a woman in the city named Sadiqwa Reynolds. Her name literally means in the Hebrew word for justice. And justice means sorting things out and seeing what belongs to whom. And there is wealth that has been taken from my people, and you see it in every city you go to. You don't have to MapQuest to find out where the black community is. You can always tell when you're in the black community, whether it's Cincinnati, Indianapolis, or Louisville. And that didn't happen by accident. That was socially engineered by policy. That is why nothing is more important than policy. Harold Lashwell at Yale University said that policy, the polis, Greek city-state, the polis, Laswell says his classic definition of politics is politics determines who gets what, when, and how. It's policy. At the McConnell Center, it's about public policy. Who gets what? Who doesn't get what? Who decides who gets what? That's what policy is based on. The polis. Indianapolis, city of Indians. Annapolis, city of Anna, the wife of Lord Baltimore. Minneapolis, city of the Twin Rivers. It's the polis. Who gets what? So you study history to learn its lessons. You study history to be inspired by its accomplishments. Basically, if you talk about black history, there are maybe about 8 to 10 epochs. And that's very important because historians talk about something called historical presentism. Historical presentism is you always think, because you're in the present, that is the most significant part of history. That's what's really happening, your present. So if I were to take a picture of this room and it was to appear on the front page of the Courier Journal, let me tell you who you would first look for. You. Because that's nature. So that you would look for you because that's how we're all wired up. So presentism says that my present moment is the most significant moment. Nothing like this moment. I am in the first part of the 21st century, but psychologically, my epoch for black people is the era after slavery. So you have different epochs. Epoch number one was 1800 to 1865. Dr. Jones mentioned Gabriel Prosser, 1800, D-Mark VC, 1822, Nat Turner, 1831. And that era, from 1800 to 1865, the overriding objective was the total dismantling of this evil system that has no comparisons in world history, and that's slavery. Chattel slavery in these United States of America. And that was the goal from 1800 to 1865. Everybody, all black people, free, quote unquote free, because even if you were free, you had no rights according to the Supreme Court that whites were bound to respect. I want you to think about that. No rights that you are bound to respect. You don't have to respect my sexuality. You don't have to respect anything about me. You can beat me, shoot me, kill me, maim me, do whatever you want to me, and I have no redress. Not just those who were enslaved, but all black people in the United States. That is truth. That's a historical fact. Then after 1865, from 1865 to around 1915, you have, 1895, when Frederick Douglass died. He died in 1895. 1 year later, you have 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. But that era is what I call, which is my favorite era in black history. If I could import the thinking of black people from 1865 to 1895, max 1915, into the heads of black people today, it'd be over. Oh, because that is what's called the race generation. You have what's called race men and race women. Now, what are race men and race women? Race men and race women, and that is a technical term, race people, were committed to one thing, very narrowly focused on building black institutions. Everybody. The have-nots, and you were in the black community, you were trying to build black institutional space. Institutions are important. Institutions, black institutions are basically, you know you're in a black institution, three things. One, color, because we have been racialized. Color, culture. I know I'm in a black church because you stay there long. When white folk in church, they get out quick because black people improvise in church. When whites are in church, they say, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see." In the black church, you still on the first syllable. Amazing. So that's black culture. Way we dance, way we do band. You go watch it, go to an HBCU band, Simmons band. I told my band director, if you want to raise, be unapologetically culturally black. I want you to be who you are culturally. So black, color, culture, but this is the number one thing about a black institution. Control. Black people want self-determination and control. Because all of our lives, we've been told by white folk what to do. And empathy means this. Now, you're looking at a brother who perhaps is the only brother you will ever meet, ever, who from the time I was 20 years old to the time, and I will be 65 in July, and I look good. I have never received a paycheck from white folk. And my house is paid for. I drive an Audi. I put my kids through school. I'm doing well. And I have never received a paycheck from white people because I always worked in black space. How many white people have worked for blacks? How many white people, even in their mind, conceive of, I'm going to go to the University of Louisville, graduate University of Louisville, so I can go work for black people? So that if you close your eyes, that's why I tell our Sunday school teachers at St. Stephen's, you have miseducated our kids if when they close their eyes and they think about God, they cannot see God in their own image. If they close their eyes and they're praying to a God and it's a white Jesus with a head and shoulders shampoo. Then you have miseducated that child. And when you close your eyes and dream about working for a company, if you can't think, you can't even conceive of, I'm going to a company that black people are in governance. Now, it's one thing for white people not to conceive of going to graduating, working for a company that's black, but what's wrong with black people if black people close their eyes and can't conceive of it? It goes back to what Dr. Jones said about the miseducation of the Negro, that even if there is no door, your very nature has to create one. That's why black people need to be born again. And that word born, that phrase born again, you hear that, evangelicals born again. It literally means, the word born again, when Jesus said to Nicodemus, he said, man, you need to be woke. Born again, it literally means start from, again, literally means go all the way back before you were contaminated by Eurocentrism. Again, start like tabula rasa so we can get your mind like an Etch-a-Sketch. so we can shake it up and write new narratives on your mind. So you have that era of where we were building our own institutions. That is when we built black colleges. The black colleges were built there. Before 1890, I want you to think about this. These people were run out of slavery. 1865, only 5% of black people were literate. In 1865. By 1915, when Booker T. Washington dies and Henry McNeil Turner dies in 1950, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, 85% of black people were literate. And it was because black people built their own institutions, the colleges. Before 1890, 20 Baptist colleges were built. Private colleges by black people who had less than 0.5% of the wealth. 20 of them, 10 of them are still in existence today. One of them was started in Augusta, Georgia, in a church in Augusta, Georgia, moved to Atlanta, named after a Baptist minister named Henry Morehouse. Then another one was in Richmond, Virginia, called Virginia Union. Another one is in Jackson, Mississippi, called, how you heard of Jackson State, Deion Sanders? Another one was started in an AME church, African American Episcopal Church Baptist School in Tuskegee, Alabama, called Tuskegee Institute. And then one was started here in Louisville, Kentucky, called, at the Fifth Street Baptist Church, called Simmons University. Started in 1879. They built their own institutions because black people need their own institution. I forgot her name, but she has a book out. It was a very good book. I highly recommend. Why do black kids sit together at the lunchroom camp? Having your own institutions. One of the things that I was often told is not Simmons and the whole HBCU, is that not a return to segregation? And my response is, when did we leave? If we're talking about integration, what we need is to integrate the resources, integrate the money. When did we leave? We need black space because the masses of black people are going to be in black space. And black space is not segregated space because it's always open to all people. It's just, it reflects black control, black culture, and black color. And anything else besides repair in terms of resources, building our own institutions today, black people, is symbolism, holidays, images, and tokens. I just said something acrostically. Symbolism, holidays, images, tokens.
Dead crowd tonight.
I just said something acrostic. Symbolism. Look at how we've put the names of black people on buildings. That don't put no money in the pocket. Holidays, Juneteenth. You still broke. Images. See, you got a black vice president, a moderate. Black president, a moderate. You don't know if sometimes Obama, you say he had a black dad and he's a black man with a white mother, or is he a white man with a black father? Images, tokens, black people's in positions without power and status without strength. So let me close and entertain some questions. I started off with County College. Now let me close on being inclusive with Rogers and Hammerstein. South Pacific. You ought to watch that. You got to be taught to hate and fear. You got to be taught from year to year. I got to drum it in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, and people whose skin is of a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And empathy, which is a great spiritual impulse, says, you know what? Through my imagination, I'm going to cross the fence into where other people are. So I'm going to cross the fence as a heterosexual to the LGBTQI community to put myself in their situation. I'm going to cross the fence as a male into the reality of female. I'm going to cross the fence into the world of as a person of privilege, and to those who don't have it. And until we do that, and let me tell you something, there's going to be an intentional movement to block you from feeling empathy, because it's going to be framed. It's all about framing. It's all about framing. How you frame something. What you have in the foreground, what you have in the background, what you completely omit. And American history has been framed so that the black experience has been completely omitted, because they know that if you learn it, it might create empathy. And if it creates empathy, then you've got to say, we got to fix this. We got to have some new policies. That's the reason they're fighting true black history, in order to prevent you from being empathetic. And if we don't fix it, we don't do it, we'll never fix the United States. We'll never fix it. We'll never fix it. They were playing chicken last night. The Republicans were playing chicken with Bush. With Biden. He's saying, I'm going to build. They're saying, no, we're going to cut. Now the whole country's going to fall off the cliff because they're playing chicken. And white folk are just as bad off as me. But you can be so propagandized that instead of forming alliances with other marginalized groups, that, what did Du Bois call it? The psychological wage of whiteness. Instead of working together in a coalition for the purpose of creating more equity for all people. I've talked too much. Thank you so much. And I'll entertain some questions at this time. Yes, ma'am.
I probably missed this. You said earlier in your speech, there's 3 reasons history learns to learn its lessons.
Yeah, 1, to learn its lessons. 2, to be inspired by its accomplishments. So I get inspired by Du Bois. I get inspired by my white brother John Brown, Viola Liuzzo. 3, you study history in order to redress or to correct its malfeasance. So we study history, say, okay, we got to correct this. So they study, for example, the Japanese internment during World War II. And then Reagan, after studying it, signs a bill in 1986, 87 in order to redress the crime. They don't want to even bring out of committee H.R. 40, which is just a study on reparations that's been in committee since 1987. Because if you study it, you got to redress it. And you got to say, well, now I understand why this happened. So everything is framed. Frame is like a picture. You just keep certain things out. Like for example, the Star-Spangled Banner, 1931 became the official song of the United States, Star-Spangled Banner. Great song until if you reframe it, because Francis Scott Key was a slave owner. And you frame it, you only include verse 1. But verse 3, it has 4 verses. If you don't believe me, check my secretary, Miss Google. It has 4 verses. Verse 3 says, no refuge shall save the hireling or slave from the terror of flight or the doom of the grave. Because black people couldn't make up their mind whether or not they wanted to deal with the tyranny of democracy or the tyranny of the king of Britain. And most black people saying, you know what, if I choose between the tyranny, what was it? Alex D. Tocqueville coined the term the tyranny of the majority. And what he meant by that is that you don't have democracy. You don't have democracy, you got majoritarianism. Where the majority imposes on the minority an agenda. So I don't have any say in Florida, on education. That's not democracy. That's majoritarianism. Even though it's true. Not saying it's not true, it's not politically expedient. You gotta bring my car back. Hey, any other questions?
Gentleman right here had his
I just
Good to
finished
see you, man.
Isabel Wilkerson's book called Caste.
Yes.
Would you tell me what that means to you, caste?
I think it's a phenomenal book. And I think that she's right on point in terms of a caste, just like in India. You know, you have the Brahmins and the untouchables. I think that black people, regardless of, I'm finishing up. I earned a doctorate in the 90s. I got an earned doctorate. I graduate with another doctorate, a PhD, in June. But a bachelor's degree, master's degree, 2 earned doctorate degrees. But I cannot escape the stigma of being black. Let me give you an example of what I mean. When I came in here, there was some technical difficulties in the room. Y'all couldn't get this mic straight. Okay? Let me tell you how it is for black people. If that had happened at Simmons, there are people who would have attributed the problem to race. So that black people have always been told, you have to be 2 or 3 times better than white folk, because if you mess up, that just reinforces that these people are not up to it. That could never happen in black space. To be white means to be able to make mistakes. Means to be able to make mistakes in sports, in basketball. You better not make a mistake if you're black, because that just reinforces presuppositions and that people already have. It's in us. We don't know it's in us. We deny it's in us. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
Would you agree that we're as polarized as we seem, or is it that cowards want us to be more divided because we're less powerful? And if so, if you would agree that we're less polarized than it appears, because a lot of us here are white, the majority, as far as empowering and helping the black community advance.
Good question.
Oftentimes, when the black community joins with other groups move ahead, it's
Right.
not. Do you think that that is still possible for?
My favorite political philosopher, I got many, but I do like Stokely Carmichael, and I think that reading his book, Black Power, many people talk about, you know, they have a dichotomy between Malcolm X and Martin King. But the real influence on Martin King Jr. was Stokely Carmichael. They marched together in the March Against Fear in June of 1966, in which the word Black Power came out for the very first time. From that point on, black people stopped calling themselves Negroes. It was that march. No longer Negroes, we black. And King adopted that. But King defined in his book, in fact, both Stokely and King wrote two books after the march. King wrote Where Do We Go From Here in 1967. Stokely wrote Black Power in 1967. It was a direct response to that march and the whole issue of Black Power. But King said an alliance, he defines an alliance. He's got a chapter in there on Black Power. He says this is what an alliance is. An alliance is when you have something that is important to you and someone else has something important to them, and you find some common ground, but you don't lose what's important to you. Integration has often meant black people having to give up their blackness. So we went from segregation to desegregation to integration to disintegration. I like Soul Train. Ain't nothing wrong with American Bandstand. I'm dating myself. I don't know. Soul Train came out in the 70s. American Bandstand with Dick Clark may have occasionally some black people on there, like Fats Domino. But who gets to name the tune? Dick Clark. Soul Train, Don Cornelius. It's a black institution. Black color, black culture, black concerns, black C words, black control. They wouldn't have Jesse Jackson, the young Jesse Jackson in the early 70s, on American Bandstand. But he was on Soul Train because when you have your own institutions, you get to educate your own people. Now, they might blow Simmons out of the water for my radicalism. And I am of the radical tradition of Du Bois. He was the man. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. He was a bad boy. And I'm of that tradition. But that radicalism, it might get you in trouble. But it's what the black community needs, it's what the white community needs, and it is essential if we're ever going to bring the races together. If we've got to deal with this thing. Good question. Yes, Doc.
Stick with this theme of education since you're here at a predominantly white institution. I've been not really surprised, but somewhat in talking to some of my own students, who I see are in effect suffering from what I call the Ruby Bridges syndrome in the 21st century, where they're having serious problems in some courses where they're the only black kids, might have two, lucky if y'all have three. We've had a conversation last semester, and I cussed them out about it a little bit, where some were telling me, yeah, you know, we come to your class, dutifully, I mean, A students, and I'm not an easy professor, I don't think, but they weren't even going to other classes. They're like, why should we go there? We don't even want to go there. They don't feel comfortable, don't feel seen. Am I misrepresenting? What do you think, and my dear brother Jason Gaines is here, who works on retention, worried about black student retention. I always tell my white colleagues, get more content about black people, get more black professors where students see themselves in the classroom, have an active national recruitment campaign to recruit more black students from across the country, because you just don't have the numbers in Kentucky. And I guarantee your numbers will probably go up, rather than ignore departments like Pan-African Studies, maybe work to enhance it. You know, in our department right now, speaking for future chair Brandon McCormick, because he's going to be pushing for more black faculty, we literally in the College of Arts and Sciences, which is the university's largest college, we got right around half of the full-time black faculty in the entire college in our department. Now, I don't know of any great plan that's in place yet to change that situation. What's your advice for black students who are in places like this, black faculty who are in places like this? Because we talk about white power, and I always tell people, look, it's a white supremacist institution, right? And people get upset about that, but we're not in the Klan or whatever. And I always say, look, white supremacy, a white supremacist space is any space where almost all the people who really run things are the white people who feel like they and only they have the right to what? Think, know, and decide.
That's it.
They're the terminal decision makers. There's no power. So you can come through the University of Louisville right now and get a degree in anything except Pan-African Studies. And if you choose to, never have a black professor. Try doing that in the reverse. And some of my colleagues still in 2023 will make the argument when questioned about why aren't we hiring more black faculty. They'll say, one, well, maybe we're broke, we ain't hiring nobody. But even when we are, strangely, from the president on down, the hires are usually monochromatic. And people will say about black people, we either can't find black professors, there's so few of us, or they cost so much money that we can't afford them. Now, I need a raise if black professors get paid so much more. Is there any hope for predominantly white institutions like this? Or do we just need to be out and go to Simmons and Morehouse? Which gave you an out. I know your real answer is to go to Simmons and Morehouse.
There is, in fact, your home is where Asa Hilliard, he was at Georgia State. Georgia State, now I don't know, I'm just hearing that Georgia State is making some tremendous strides.
We just talked about Georgia State today. Okay, Georgia State graduates more black students than any school in the country. But there's a trick to it.
Okay.
Georgia State sits in the heart of Atlanta.
Okay.
Which is the last refuge for black people. Right. And I ain't saying that just because that's my hometown.
What about the curriculum and blacks in decision-making positions?
Still fighting to go through transformation. Now, Georgia State does have a black president, and I think a black provost right now. If you didn't know, the University of Louisville, people got upset and called me a radical out here, in its 225 years, never had a black president. Now, I wasn't pissed about the hiring of the last president. I don't know, I haven't met him. But I was pissed when the white president was hired, and they led with one thing that made her a good hire was her record on diversity. So, in effect, you're telling black people, hey, please meet your new white savior who knows what's better for you than you do, and certainly any black president that was to hire. So Georgia State is in a different position.
I think that we need to, and you're raising a good point. First of all, if you've got historical black colleges and universities, that means you've got historical white colleges and universities. So I don't like to use PWI, predominantly white institutions. I think it's more accurate to say the University of Louisville is a historical white college and university. That needs to be thrown into their face. You are a historically white college and university. Just like I'm a historical black college and university, and it is white policymakers that made that pop. They created that. DE&I. Oh, God. Let me give this. What's DE&I? Diversity, equity, inclusion. This is what it means to me. Domination, Eurocentrism, indoctrination. Because who gets to set the agenda? Number one, for DE&I. If you don't have DE&I, add 2 letters to it, C and E. Control and empowerment. And that spells DICE. So instead of just DE&I, spell it DEICE. Or, that's an option. You got 2 options. DICE within white space. Diversity, equity, inclusion, control, which means blacks have control intentionally, and empowerment. Or BEI. Yeah, DEI, BEI is Black Empowerment Institutions, like Simmons College. It's bad for a clergyman to be pessimistic. It's interesting because Dr. Jones and I, sometimes we flip script. You know, I'm like something like the old Dr. Jones. He becomes like Kevin Conn. It's just weird. That's what he said. It's weird. Because sometimes he's more Christian than me. I'm a pastor. Because, you know what I mean? I don't see, you know, I call it South Pacific. There's another phrase in South Pacific called I'm stuck like a dope with a thing called hope. Hope, H-O-P-E, having only positive expectations. I don't have, based on history, I don't have much hope. And that's what the critical race theorists like Derek Bell was saying. Derek Bell was saying this thing is permanent. Because the only way you're going to fix it, it's going to be a revolution. I don't see how you can fix it. I'm talking about reparations. You would have a war in this country if you started really repairing black folk. I don't know how we can fix it, Don. To be totally honest with you, I was just talking about the University of Louisville because I don't know how to fix this either. So. I don't. Yes, sir. Yes.
I'm an 8th grade teacher in Northern Kentucky, and I show these YouTube videos to my students. If I were to show this to my students, we're in a predominantly white neighborhood, 1 black faculty member, and less than 15% students of color. What are you going to tell them? How do they navigate this mandatory space that they've been assigned, being in a public school in the area that they're from? So they don't really have choices to go other places. What do you tell them to navigate this space? What do you tell our almost exclusively white staff to help them navigate their next 4 years as a 8th graders?
That's a good question.
Until they have choice.
But you said the white staff or the black kids?
The black kids.
Both. How do, I mean, we have 1 person of color on the staff, and
It's your whole school, 1 black
I have
faculty?
the whole school. There's a handful in the whole county. So what do we tell those students who don't get to see themselves in positions of power and excellence and control? What do we tell them, or how do we help them? Again, not tell them, but how do we help them navigate those next 4 years where they're not going to see those?
And I appreciate your question, and I appreciate the heart that gives birth to your question. You're a good heart. I think that first, as you have already acknowledged, recognizing that it is an issue. Because for some people, that's not an issue because white saviorism, whites often think that we have to save black people from their blackness, which is like, I gotta save a fish from water just because I don't swim in water. You kill the fish. So, helping black people black kids to be comfortable in the skin they are in, and affirming their experience, their reality, I think is very important. So resist the temptation to anglicize, to make black people white people with black skin, to Afro-Saxonize black people. So I think that's a good starting point. Secondly, I would try to create as many collaborations as I possibly could with the remaining few black institutions, because we've been told that, to me, the number one, so when I'm writing my PhD on, and that is in black institutions, the number one problem in black America is the absence, the loss of black institutions. We used to have black businesses in schools, churches, businesses, and media, but we've lost them all. So trying to partner with black institutions, I think is critically important too. Yeah. My friend. Yeah.
Just to drag it out a little bit longer, bear with me. So I have a question about religion, Reverend. And I work for the Commission on Human Rights. And the Commission on Human Rights is here to defend the Kentucky Civil Rights Act. And if you don't know, Kentucky Civil Rights Act ensures equality in public accommodations, employment. And what we're seeing is an all-out war on that law from religion, from a religious perspective. That people, because of their religious conscience, shouldn't have to serve everybody equally. They shouldn't have to treat people equally if their conscience conflicts with who those people are. As a faith leader, what's your response to that? To the use of religion as a weapon against equality?
I think there should be a major firewall between church and state. A major. And I have serious problems with that. So I think religion has its place, but to impose my religion, which is in many, especially when we talk about white evangelical, white nationalistic religion, is dangerous. Yeah. So I would push back against that, my friend. So good to see you again. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, bring my car back, y'all. Oh, thank you so much. Tell me your name again.
I'm Cameron.
Cameron, thank you so much, Cameron. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Again, thank you all for being here and thank you for joining us on YouTube. We hope that you'll join us again on February 21st when U of L's own Dr. Ricky Jones joins us to speak. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Hey, and let's give it up for Gary Gregg, please. He's the director of the McConnell Center. Made all this happen. Pulled it off.
Man,